Hey, everybody, welcome back to Pro AV today. I am your host, Ben Thomas. You know, as we look at a post-COVID world, the events world has changed dramatically, especially from an event planning standpoint, where considerations that you may have had to have pre-pandemic, we now are having to have totally different conversations now, whether that's technology planning, power planning, access control, things like that. And I think it's important for us to have a conversation help level set where we are as an events industry. And I wanted to bring on somebody today that can really speak to that. And he also took my normal studio, and that's Russ Callahan from Quest Events. Russ, you're in my normal seat, but you know what? I'll let you have it for the day. Thanks for coming on.
I give you credit. It's pretty comfortable, so that works.
Well, it is. It's the chair, right? You get the nice microphone. You can move it all around.
Absolutely.
But, you and I kind of had a chance to chat after InfoComm, and we spoke a little bit about how the events world has changed, more specifically kind of on the hybrid side where folks try and shoehorn live content and things like that into shows where it may not need it or replicate similar experiences, which I'll link to the episode where you talked about that in the soundbite from InfoComm. I'll let you guys watch that after this conversation. But today I want to focus a little bit more specifically, Russ, on a conversation that a lot of folks on the marketing side, on the event planning side, are having to have now, and that is, how has the events industry and planning world changed? And as somebody who really has their finger on the pulse, not only of the events world as a whole, but on the technology side of that, wanted to get your insight today. So really on a high level, Russ, what are you seeing right now as some of the most common challenges that folks are having as they're trying to plan events, maybe pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest change is you have to be much more global in your preparation. And that doesn't mean that in the past you didn't have a global preparation look, but you always have more things in the back of your mind than you used to. There was a sea change in the event space for Hurricane Katrina. All of a sudden, multiple events got wiped out, had nowhere to go. So everybody looked at insurance, and so that kind of changed the world. Now, as you're approaching these events, you can't even get insurance for a pandemic anymore. That's gone. A lot of the industry is lobbying Congress to get that corrected. But you have to look at so many different pieces that you didn't necessarily look at as closely before. And some of it is just a maturation of what we were looking at early on in the event space before. So before the pandemic, there started to be a lot more emergency preparation discussions happening. And the discussions were early in on how can technology help you to that point? What can you do to leverage that technology? And now, post-pandemic, there's much more of a focus on that because you have to worry about so many more things. We actually had a tabletop exercise I went through a couple of years ago where this person literally put us through the ringer on, okay, the next thing you're going through this event and now 100 people fall sick in one of your halls. What do you do next? And while when I went through it, that was okay, yeah, whatever. I guess that could happen. Somebody had some bad cheese or something. But now when you think back to that, it's like, okay, this is pretty serious. This could really happen. And you have to know what you can do next and how can you leverage the technology that exists in a show or in a building for that matter to be able to do that. And so it takes a lot more pre-planning. And I just finished reading a Stephen Covey book for the umpteenth time. Every few years I read 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And one of the things that always sticks out to me with that is begin with the end in mind. Okay, what do you want to be able to accomplish and how are you going to get to that point? And how can you use everything around you to do that? This is one of the crazy things when we used to sell digital signage in one of my old lives. And so we'd sell digital signage in front of every room. And I remember sitting in a group meeting with a trade show producer and I said, well, how come that's not part of your security? How come it's not part of your emergency action plan? So if something does go wrong, all of that can be taken over with the same message with instructions. And so there's a lot of different things that can happen. And if you're not willing to look at the infrastructure of the building and everything else that's going on with kind of a fresh eye and, okay, what can we do? What do we need to happen? And what are all these things that can help us get there?
Well, you bring up a great point, too, and it's not only the evolution of technology, it's also folks that maybe have found themselves in positions of leadership now that are in enterprise event planning, right? And people who probably over the last 4 or 5 years, in some cases, haven't had to plan, whether it's a trade show, a dealer conference, a sales meeting, things like that, who are now having to do this for the first time. And I think, especially when you look, at maybe the traditional event planning world, just more your weddings, small scale events, things like that, folks a lot of times assume that they can do that and set that up kind of on their own, right? And then they jump into the world where the Quest events and the Freemans of the world are, we talk about union labor and working and gear rentals and totally different stratospheres of events. What are some of the things that you're seeing folks need to learn as they kind of age into this enterprise, or not even age in, as they have found their way into the enterprise event planning space?
Yeah. So one of the great effects of the pandemic, which wasn't so great, was the amount of tribal knowledge lost. A lot of people in the event space retired because they'd been in it forever, and some just left because they found it was too unstable. So a lot of those people are coming back, new people are coming in, and a lot of times, quite frankly, they don't know what they don't know. And so taking a step back and asking those more experienced people, one of the things that we said as Quest is we looked at, okay, what do we have to do as we're changing the way we operate out of COVID? Well, we're going to have to be prepared to train our customers how to even order, because they don't know what they need to order. They don't know how to measure it. They don't know what they don't know. So it's taking a lot more really proactive stance on how do I train people to know what can be done. There's always an aspect of sales where every salesperson has to educate their client on what they do. But this is actually a couple of steps past that. It's not only what we do, but it's how you do it. I've always, in my history, just because it makes sense to me, gone with a consultative approach. I tell people, hey, if you don't, I live in Las Vegas. I know the Las Vegas Convention Center inside and out, and how to do a show there. And I would tell people back in the day, hey, if you don't go with me, that's fine. I get it. You need price, budget, whatever. But if you have a question, reach out. I lose nothing by answering your questions on how to do this so you can be successful. And next time when you have a budget, maybe you'll come talk to me. That type of approach, and the I want to train, I want to teach, I want to help approach is where it needs to go. And in turn, the people who are just entering the business need to be humble enough to go, yeah, last year I did this wedding for 200 people. Now I'm doing a trade show for 5,000. I know I'm missing something. What am I missing? And they have to go at it with that mindset, or it can be really ugly.
Well, one of the places I've seen a lot of folks, especially on their first or second go around, kind of eat crow with the large events is staffing. And then not understanding union laws and local municipalities, not understanding all these sorts of different things, especially when you start talking about technology, whether it's live broadcast, whether it's having PA operators or front of house engineers or technicians. They don't really understand that they can't just make a call to their friend down the street and say, hey, can you come run this console for me? What are some of the biggest things that you see, especially when thinking of a staffing and an actual operational standpoint, that folks miss a lot of the time on their first go around?
Especially if you're going into a union building, it is worth your time to read the rules. I know this sounds insane because, what guy out there has ever opened up a box and read the package and, not had to go back to it later in life. But anybody who's going into one of these facilities, I always found it was very valuable for me to know the rules better than the person I'm talking to who's actually in the union, because it saves me a lot of money, saves me a lot of hassle, and shortens the argument. Most locations in the country are a work first, grieve later type of environment because they know you've got a very limited amount of time. If you know their rules, you know the house rules, and you know who to talk to before you walk in the door, you're going to stop yourself from having a lot of frustration. My son's in the union in Vegas. He's in IATSE union, and he goes through this where these guys are just trying to defend their work. They're trying to defend their livelihood. And it's not a great situation for them to be put in to tell you, I'm sorry, you cannot do that. Or, oh, by the way, there's this thing called a broadcast fee. you're pushing this across the web. Everybody on this staff makes more money while you're doing that. And it's not a situation they want to be any more than you do. But if you read the rules, you know the contracts, you know what you're getting into, you're going to save everybody a lot of hassle, and you're going to save yourself an absolute ton of money. And that's beside the fact of how hard it is to get good labor in these locations right now. So if you know what's going on, and you have those relationships you've built with the union hall and the stewards on site, you're going to help ensure that you get the right guys and gals on your show. Knowing and building that relationship, just like any part of sales or anything else, if you build those relationships, you're going to guarantee your success, and you're also going to guarantee you can stay under your budgets.
Well, Russ, I want to go back to something that you said a minute ago when you were talking about kind of knowing where you want to go. A lot of times what we find is that folks who are event planners have a really grandiose vision, which is great, right? But may not understand the physical, the technical limitations that exist in a lot of these spaces. My mind immediately goes to things like viewing angles for projectors or LED screens, and PA power and being able to tune rooms and things like that. What are some of the technical considerations that folks who might not have an understanding of the professional AV and installation world would need to know before going into some of these things?
And it really depends if you're looking at audio, video, lighting, all of these things. You start off with, what's your audience size, and what are you really trying to accomplish with this audience size? I always had this discussion with my clients. Look, there are many ways to do something. I can do this room for $15,000 and you'll be relatively happy. I can do this room for $100,000 and you're going to think you're walking on cloud nine. So where is your budget in that process? And trust me to be a good steward to your money. It is extremely important, if you are an event planner, to know your budget, know what you're willing to spend, and not have an adversarial relationship with your providers. You at some point have to trust your providers have your best interest in mind, because if they're a business person who wants to continue a relationship and is worried about the long term, then they're going to be fair to you, and in turn you need to be fair to them. So when they ask you what your budget is, you don't have to give it to the penny, but give them a ballpark so that they know what to give you. Because the grandiose idea, I want this. I was looking at this thing and I saw this thing on YouTube where they had Tupac on stage as a hologram. It was the most amazing thing. I want that in my show. Okay, do you have $75,000 plus licensing rights?
Do you have space for that hologram
do you have space
setup?
For that? I mean, it's the oldest gag in existence. It's Pepper's Ghost. I mean, it's been around since the early 1900s. I mean, it's a fantastic gag. But it takes
if you could fit a gigantic mirror on stage, right. It's fantastic.
It takes technology, it takes all of these things, it takes rights. And so it allows you as the provider to give some guidance. And if you're in the event space, people who make events for a living generally are creative types. They have this great grandiose idea, and they're used to blue skying all this stuff. This sounds great. This sounds great. Let me bring this in. And the difference between blue skying and reality is usually a lot of money. So partnership is the only way to approach it. You've picked these people because they're professionals. You've picked them because you should be able to trust what they're telling you. So trust what they're going to tell you. And if you're honest with them up front and say, look, okay, I've got $100,000 and this is what I want to do, they're going to give you the best option they can give you for that price. And if you don't trust that they're doing that, get a quote from somebody else. If you don't trust that they're doing that, find somebody else. But build the relationship in a partnership sense, and it's going to go a long way for you and for your provider.
Well, I want to act as devil's advocate here just a little bit, right? And we would be remiss to pretend that there is always a very positive thought process of folks in enterprise events, right? Because as somebody who has participated in, help plan, whether it's a broadcast event, whether it's a dealer training, whatever. I've had the opportunity to be part of and plan a lot of those. There sometimes are barriers and frustrations where it feels like there shouldn't be. And I'm going to use one example, and I'll give you the floor here in a second. But internet connectivity.
Oh, yes.
Why in the world does it still cost me $15,000? And I'm acting from the perspective of somebody who, I get it, I understand, right? But I know the infrastructure, I know the work that goes into it. But what it doesn't compute, and it doesn't always make sense to somebody who's planning that event. How can we better serve as the enterprise community some of those expectations of folks that are coming in and expecting Wi-Fi?
So I actually reached out to somebody in a certain hotel yesterday and said, look, I've got 13 people in a meeting and we just need to be able to check email. Well, the way the hotel's set up, all we have is the ability to give you 50 megabits and it's going to cost you $1,200. I said, no, thanks. We'll go on MiFi. Okay. That is the easy, quick answer for most people. But so an unfortunate part of the system as it's currently created, whether you're a hotel or you are a convention center or another facility like that, you have a responsibility to give infrastructure to your client, infrastructure that changes very, very quickly and constantly. And so you at the same time need to make sure you're doing this in a safe way, a way that your building is going to look like it's supposed to when you're done. And you need to have something that's consistent, somebody that you can depend upon. Well, how those are structured in most cases, and this is just an unfortunate part of the business, is they end up giving 50% of whatever they make as a company to the house. So in this case, the house always wins. And they have put themselves into an impossible situation because they have to make the house happy and they have to make the front customer happy. And they're going to be overpriced no matter what. And it is really just an unfortunate way that the business model has been done to this point. It's huge in the AV world. There's actually a group in Canada that is pushing against this contract structure in the AV world in Canada because of the cost difference between an outside company coming in and an inside company having control over everything. Does the building have the right to protect its physical asset, rigging, cables, things of that nature? Would it be impossible for a company to change internet companies every time they want to go in and out, to rehook up the lines, to get fiber run, all those things? So there isn't an easy, good answer to why that happens, but there is a reason it happens, and it all comes down to how do we give a consistent quality, something we can stand behind approach and make money. And those two aren't always working well together.
Well, and that is the tough reality right now of, I would say, the difference between small to mid-scale events and the enterprise events, right? And
Yes.
And look, the reality is everybody wants to make money, and pretending like that's not the case is asinine for us. But I think there's a good way for us as a community to find that balance and find that compromise. And having folks that are coming into the industry with different expectations, whether it's not having to pay for power or not having to pay as much for internet or having some level of support that's baked into the cost. Those are some of the things I think that will continue to influence the industry moving forward. You know, kind of putting you on the spot here a little bit. What are some of the things, and maybe what's one thing that you think that the industry could continue to evolve and maybe give a little bit back towards the consumer side of the world and air back a little bit more towards giving them some flexibility, freedom, maybe some cost savings?
I think the easy answer there is the internet. I mean, how much money can it really cost to move electrons? And yeah, I know it costs a lot, and I've been in server rooms, I've done all that, I get it. But as the technology increases so quickly, and when you get to some level set, there should be an ability to lower that overall price. And you can actually see the pressure on the industry and the fact that most convention centers now have a free attendee internet, so you can get on and at least check emails, much like most airports have a free access now. So you can see the pressure is starting to work. It's going to take a little while longer. I don't see electrical going that way because internet is one thing that you can install and keep. Electrical, especially in a trade show environment and most event environments, is a flexible thing. You have to change the amount, you have to change your step downs, you have to change types, voltages, all those things. So that's so fluid, it's going to be really hard to pull something like that back. The other difficult one, and the other thing that everybody goes to besides internet, honestly, is food at any one of these things, because it's like going to a ballpark. It's $15 for a beer and $20 for a sandwich and whatever. But as someone who's run a business inside of a convention center, when you have stop-start business and you have to be able to supply employees that are trained, know what they're doing, because this is a profession, and all of a sudden they're going to be off for 2 or 3 weeks because there's nothing happening in that building, there's a lot of cost internally to making that happen. And some places, that's why they have culinary unions, is because that has the ability to be a little bit more like a temp agency that has some more control over what these people know. So there's a reason why that stuff costs more, besides having to give a cut back to the house, because that's part of it. But the ability to run that business in a stop-start fashion is not an easy thing to do. It is a challenge.
Well, Russ, I very much appreciate your insight. And as somebody who shares a lot of the frustrations, but also understands the enterprise side of the world, I think it's important to continue to have these conversations and have an open line of communication and be transparent about our frustrations as a community, both on the enterprise side and the convention center side, but also the event planner side. I think it will only continue to get better for all of us as a community, especially in the AV world. Love seeing shows like Infocom, NAB, ISC continue to thrive and leverage some of those spaces well. So very optimistic about our future, but we appreciate you coming on Pro AV today. Russ.
Thank you much. Appreciate it. It's a great time.
And thank you all for tuning in. Look, shameless product placement. If you're not working with Quest Events, I highly recommend those folks. I'm not getting paid to say this, by the way. I genuinely love the work that they're doing, not only here in Texas and DFW, but across the world, across the United States, especially in Vegas. Love the folks out there too. So we appreciate Russ coming on today. We appreciate you for listening. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time for Pro AV Today.